these two schools should start playing each other. And how the rivalry kept going, I think to me today is still an amazement, because in the first 15 games, Ohio State did not win. In fact, in game number 6, a halfback from Ohio State, the name of Bill Marquardt, became a real hero. Not because Ohio State won the game; they lost the game 31-6, but that was his 6th game of the series, and that he scored the first touchdown against Michigan. So Michigan really had the upper hand, but I guess the proximity to the schools probably had a lot to do with it.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. And by the way, Bruce, love Bruce dearly. No, I cannot represent the University of Michigan here. I'm a journalist, dude. Can't wear school colors. Can't do the rah-rah and all that.
You're a good historian.
I do know the history of this place, and of course I did go here, so I may have secretly a preference. We don't know. But anyway, Jack's an old buddy of mine, and you got one of the all-time experts right here. Turn on any Big Ten network, especially on Ohio State. Jack and his hat are going to be right there. So, good friend of mine. It starts amazingly because in 1906, you guys won't believe this, Michigan left the Big Ten. They're one of the 7 charter members of the Big Ten. Ohio State is not. And I'll give you a buck if you can name all 7. Anyone here can name all 7 by chance? It's worth $1 US for you. Yeah, there you go. It's the first 7 were Michigan, Purdue, Chicago. University of Chicago was a charter member of the Big Ten. Northwestern, Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And those are 7 right there. Indiana was not on that list. Iowa not on that list. Ohio State not on that list. Michigan State came much later. What happened back in 1905, Michigan was beating up on Chicago quite a bit, and Amos Alonzo Stagg was the legendary coach for the University of Chicago. A little more history. He was the 2nd employee. It's Rockefeller's money that started the University of Chicago. Same way Duke's money, Cornell, Stanford, all these schools, Rice, etc., were all these robber barons who started their own schools in the late 1800s. Rockefeller started Chicago and did not amazingly name it after himself, a rare moment of humility, I guess, for that man. The 2nd employee they hired was Amos Alonzo Stagg. If you want to get on the map as a university, you have to be good at football. So Chicago, 3 years later, is a charter member of the Big Ten, meeting back at the Palmer House Hotel in Chicago, which you Chicagoans have probably been to. So there you go. He hated Yost. Yost hated him, but Yost is kicking his butt. 4 straight years, undefeated all 4 years. Big Ten title, national title, 01, 02, 03, 04. Finally, in 05, Stagg beats Michigan by the score of 0-2. A safety decides that game incredibly. And as soon as they won that game, he knew that was his chance to get Michigan out of the Big Ten. So he passed a rule with the Big Ten, saying you had to be a full-time faculty member to coach a team in the Big Ten. Stagg was, Yost wasn't. That was his chance to get Yost out of the Big Ten. And Yost said, okay, tell you what, I'll take my whole team out of the Big Ten. Believe it or not, Michigan was not in the Big Ten from 1906 to 1917. That's pretty amazing to think about that. The team probably was associated with the Big Ten, but was not a member for 10 years. During those 10 years, Stagg also passed the Big Ten's non-intercourse rule. I'm not making that up. And it's not what you think it means either, by the way. It means that Big Ten teams could not play non-Big Ten teams that left Big Ten, only one of those, Michigan. So as a result, Michigan starts playing teams that are not in the Big Ten. Who do they play? Notre Dame, Michigan State, and Ohio State. Who are your 3 greatest rivals to this day? Those 3. You can thank Amos Alonzo Stagg for that, because during this 10 years in the wilderness, that's what they played. Minnesota faded. Chicago, of course, is long gone. But out of that became the Ohio State rivalry. In 1918, both Michigan and Ohio State are in the Big Ten for the first time. They played every year since. And since then, I know Jack knows this. In fact, I might just quiz you on it. Jack, what is the record between Michigan and Ohio State since they're both in the Big Ten? Do you know that one?
Well, let's see. The record today is 58-48-6. And by 1918, there were 14 games played. And so out of those 14 games, Ohio State won 0, Michigan won 12 and tied 2. So I guess if you take the 58 minus 12 would be 46. 48 wins for Ohio State. You remove a couple ties from the 6, that'd be 46, 50, 48, 46, 48, and 4, which would be 98. Is that right? 98 games?
Now I gotta go back and check my work, apparently. I trust Jack more than I trust him at the websites. I had it down as 47-46, Michigan versus Ohio State. This is above the Big Ten. That is what a rivalry looks like. A century, damn near, and it's just about a coin toss to this day. That is incredible. Almost no one else, not Duke and UNC in basketball, almost no one else in college football, college sports, can claim a rivalry like that. It is that close year in, year out. 12 times undefeated teams have entered the game, and only 7 emerged undefeated. And perfect records have been ruined 9 times for Michigan, 11 for Ohio State. They've determined between them the Big Ten title 22 times, another 27 times. It influenced the outcome. That'll be the case this weekend, obviously. You're almost always playing for the marbles. You guys, how many of you guys are seniors now? Almost all of you. There you go. You guys had 3 crappy years in this rivalry, unfortunately. That is the exception, not the rule. Almost always when you're in school at Michigan or Ohio State, the season boils down to 1 game in late November, and here it is. So as far as why that matters, there it is. And also for a half century, Michigan was the only Big Ten school in the state of Michigan, and Ohio State, of course, is still the only Big Ten school in the state of Ohio. So that's another reason why these guys are going at it that much. So there's about 15 answers as to why it's such a big deal, Andrew, but there's your answer.
All right, so going back to Jack here, can you describe how Ohio State rose to prominence in the Big Ten and really started competing with Michigan?
Well, it really evolves around one player. Probably the greatest player in Ohio State football history was a man by the name of Chip Harley. He came to Ohio State and became, at that time, he could only play 3 years, of course, and he became a sophomore in 1916. As John said, Ohio State was a newcomer to the Big Ten, did not join the Big Ten until 1913. And there were only 7 teams, as you say. Iowa and Indiana joined in 1902, and Ohio State not until 1913. And that's when the Ohio State-Michigan series, as John said, then got a break in there because you couldn't join the Big Ten and still play Michigan. You couldn't do that until Michigan joined again until 1918. Chip Harley put Ohio State on the map. In 1916, he led the Buckeyes to their first perfect season, their first Big Ten title. He was our first 3-time All-American. This is being a little bit philosophical, but had there been a Heisman Trophy back at that time, I don't think Ohio State would have just the only 2-time winner of the Heisman Trophy, and Archie Griffin. I think they would have 2 of them, Chip Harley and Archie Griffin. So it was a little illustration of Chip Harley. Ohio State at that time played its football on what was known as Old Ohio Field up along High Street, the corner of Woodruff and High Street. And it would eventually seat 20,000 people. Before Harley came to Ohio State, Columbus High School was out to Ohio State. They may get 2,000 or 3,000 fans for their games. East and North was a big rivalry. They'd probably draw 6,000 or 8,000. After Harley left, Old Ohio Field with a seating capacity of 20,000 was too small. And it was the enthusiasm for Ohio State football developed by this man, Chip Harley, that led the drive to raise the money to build Ohio Stadium, which was built 100% with donations from alumni and from friends within the state of Ohio. So that was a big year. He led Ohio State to its first win over Michigan right here at Old Ferry Field, right up the street here, in 1919 by a score of 13-3. Before that, in the first 15 games before that, not only Ohio State not won any of those games, Michigan had outscored Ohio State 369-21. And touchdowns were only 5 points in some of those years, so it was worse. So, if you're looking at it, John, from the Ohio State standpoint, if you look at the first 15 games, Michigan wins 13, and there are 2. If you look at the last 15 games, Ohio State has won 13, and Michigan has won 2. So it kind of evens out there somewhere in the middle there.
So a lot of times when we're looking at this rivalry, there's a little bit of discussion of the origination, kind of jumps right to the 10-year war. But before we get to that, before we get to the famous 1969 game, which I know everyone wants to hear about, let's talk about some of the key developments that happened between in the 1920s and 30s that really got this rivalry off to a good start once Ohio State started being more competitive.
Some quick ones you should know. 1922, Ohio State invites Michigan for their dedication game, the Horseshoe. And they bet, apparently, that if Michigan won that game, they would leave some maize and blue decorations on the stadium. And Jack, you know where I'm going with this one.
Absolutely, I know where you're going.
Exactly. It's a gorgeous stadium, of course. You go to the north end of the Horseshoe, the vault, I guess you call it. look up. The fields are yellow, and the roses and the flowers are blue. It's the only amazing blue you'll ever find probably anywhere in the entire county, I believe. But that they put up there from 1922, and they kept it up there to their credit, I think. So in 27, Michigan invites Ohio State back to dedicate the Big House, which tells you, by the way, already in the 20s, they're already seeing each other as each other's main rival. That's how far back that goes. Even though Minnesota was still good at that time, and so was Chicago, Ohio State was clearly edging out the others for that. Favorite scene of that game, Michigan wins 22-0. Fielding Yellows is walking out of the game with Benny Oosterbahn, his star player. They're walking back to campus. It's a much more casual time. You couldn't do that now, I don't think. And he says, Benny, and they sold the place out 85,000 seats. And the town of Ann Arbor only had 27,000 people at that time. You didn't have I-94. Very few guys had cars. And you sold out 3 times the size of Ann Arbor. That's selling out 300,000 a day, basically. It's a pretty incredible feat. And he's walking out with Benny Oosterbahn and says, Benny, you know the best part of today's game was? And Benny says, I don't know, Mr. Yost. He goes, Benny, all those fans paid $5 each to come to the game. And Benny, they had to leave the seats there. Right? And I was going to rent those out every single game, and now it's worth more than $5, of course, for you guys. That was another big game. I think the biggest game, in my opinion, was 1950, the Snow Bowl, and I bet Jack might back me up on this one. Ohio State was led by a coach named Wes Fessler. They often had great names, I believe. Sounds like WKRP in Cincinnati. Ask your parents, you don't know about that show from the 70s and 80s. They were supposed to win. They already were the Big Ten champs. The worst blizzard in years. It cost a few lives, I believe. The state of Ohio happened Friday night, and the Ohio State coach could have said, we're not playing the game. It's not safe. If he had done that, they would have been the Big Ten champs. They would have gone to the Rose Bowl, and that would have been it. But Fritz Chrysler persuaded him to play the game. They played the game the next day, and how many punts did they have in that game? 45. 45 punts in that one game. 45 punts. Michigan did not complete a first down or a forward pass the entire game. They blocked 2 punts for a safety and a touchdown, and they won the game. That cost Wes Fessler his job. So now Michigan's the Big Ten champs. They go to Rose Bowl. Wes Fessler, because of that game, is fired. Who do they hire in his place? Woody Hayes. All right, so I maintain that Snow Bowl is the best thing that happened to Ohio State. You lost Wes Fessler, you gained Woody Hayes, would have gone somewhere else otherwise. And now you've got 28 straight years of football excellence thanks to that game. And then, of course, we get to the 10-year war. I'll let Jack fill in some blanks, and we'll do the 10-year war.
John, I agree with you 100%, although Wes Fessler had been a 3-time All-American at Ohio State, and he actually led Ohio State the year before to a Rose Bowl victory, the first Rose Bowl victory in Ohio State history. So he did have some good, but he lost. He had not won over Michigan in 4 years, and it's hard to keep your job in Columbus if you don't win a Michigan at least one time in 4 years. And that definitely was eventually one of the best things that ever happened. But there was a little something else the next year that really happened. Ohio State wanted a man by the name of Don Farrow, a very, very prominent national coach at that time at the University of Missouri, and he wanted the Ohio State job. And Ohio State had become known as the graveyard of coaches at that time, and whoever took the job following Fessler, which would be in 1951, whoever that head coach was, he would be the 6th different head coach within a period of 12 years. Don Farrow, this very prominent coach, he would be kind of like maybe the Nick Saban of football today. I mean, very prominent national coach. And he comes in and he accepts the job. And Dick Larkins, the director of athletics, tells him, this is great. Hey, don't say too much about it. We're going to call a press conference next week. You will be announced as the new head coach. Before that press conference could be announced, Farrow called Larkins and said, you know what? This is the graveyard of coaches. I think I'm going to just stay here at Missouri. He changed his mind. And because he changed his mind, if you're kind of philosophical as an Ohio State fan, that telephone call was the best telephone call in the history of the Ohio State University football program, because that was what led the selection committee then to make their second choice, and that's how Woody Hayes got the job, basically, at the Ohio State University there. Between then, John and everybody there, a man named Paul Brown came in out of Massillon, Ohio. He was just 33 years old. He would eventually become the founder of the Cleveland Browns. Of course, they're named after him, and later he would become the founder of the Cincinnati Bengals. And we don't talk about the Browns and Bengals anymore in Ohio now, particularly the Browns. But Paul Brown led Ohio State to its very, very first national title in 1942. That's long after Michigan had many, many national titles. And the key game to winning that national title actually was played 74 years ago today on the 21st of November of 1942 in Columbus. Ohio State won the game 21-7, and that's still one of Ohio State's biggest victories ever over the University of Michigan. So Woody comes in, of course, and he's able to beat Michigan pretty regularly, although not as regularly as some of our later coaches, but he was able to accumulate a 16, 11, and 1, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this last 10 games a little bit more here.
Yeah, before we get into the 10-year war, can you describe that a little bit of the era before Bo Schembechler came in, the Woody Hayes, and some of that early dominance over Michigan?
Yeah, basically, there was a 24-year period of time there from 1952 to 1975 where Ohio State and Michigan, with Hayes coaching Michigan, Hayes coaching Ohio State all those games, Michigan only won 7 of those games. And Ohio State had 3 national titles in that period of time. Under Woody Hayes, Ohio State will eventually have 5 national titles. And so Ohio State football really became quite something. It had been big under Brown. In fact, it had been pretty big from 1933 through 1937. A man by the name of Francis Schmidt brought a type of wide open football to the Midwest from Texas Christian, and he shut out Michigan 4 in a row. And that has something to do with what's coming up on Saturday, because he's the only coach in Ohio State football history to have won his first 4 games against the University of Michigan. Of course, that might change Saturday. We'll probably talk about that a little bit later here if you get into a prediction and so forth there, but that was a big period of time too to be able to do that. But to set the stage for what I think is probably maybe the best hire.
Travis Schmidt, the pants.
Oh, the Pants Club. Yeah, that's right. Francis Schmidt, if you may be aware, the Ohio State players each receive little replica gold pants every time Ohio State beats Michigan. In fact, the last 2 years, it's pretty hard on the Treasury. 2 years before that, it wasn't very hard on the Treasury at all to buy these gold pants. But what Francis Schmidt told his team is he held up a football when he met the team for the first time. He said, fellas, this is a football. It has not been crossing the Michigan goal line very much. You guys here haven't beaten Michigan very much. He says we should start doing that. Those guys up at Michigan, they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you do. Well, it's easy to remember his first game and what the score was. It was 1934, and Ohio State won that game over Michigan 34-0. And from that off-the-cuff remark, basically, Ohio State then started the Pants Club, where we get these little gold pants. But leading up to the 10-year war, each of these 2 schools has gone through a period that wasn't quite as good as it would like to be. And I think basically, as we'll talk here, with the great stuff that Bo Schembechler did, it's really one of the great stories in American athletics. It really is what he did when he came here in 1969. But from 1958 through 1967, the University of Michigan played 94 football games. 3 of them were ties. That means that the other 91 games had a winner and a loser. Michigan won 45 of those games and lost 46. So it was basically a break-even program there. I can go back and I can show you a few years in Ohio State football history where it was a lot worse than that. Bump Elliott, I think, was a pretty good coach. I think he was probably one to be much more in athletic administration. That's what he did, because he wasn't that old. He had a real good team his last year in 1968. In fact, Ohio State won the national title that year, undefeated with what was known as the super sophomores. But that Michigan game, Ohio State versus Michigan, that came down to the winner of that game would have gone to the Rose Bowl. But Michigan football, basically, probably some games were under 50,000 here at the Big House. I think the Northwestern homecoming game of 67 had 67,000 people like that. And there's going to be a huge cultural change starting in 1969.
So Jack's already started painting the picture. I'm going to let you continue this description of where's Michigan football in 1968 and then what changes.
Jack was actually too nice. Michigan from 1951 to 1968 won exactly 1 Big Ten title in 18 years. So the drought you guys are experiencing is nothing compared to that one, of course. Michigan State was the best team in the state of Michigan. They won 6 national titles during that stretch. They were dominant, and whatever they weren't winning, Ohio State was. So Michigan was our 3rd place team basically in the Big Ten during that stretch. Bo gets hired in 1969. Bo has got, you gotta understand that his dad was a quiet guy who did not follow sports. Woody Hayes was a loud, temperamental guy who clearly was a sports fanatic. Woody Hayes was Bo's basic father. He played for him at Ohio. He coached with him at Ohio State, not 1 but 2 stints. And that was basically Bo's dad. So that's how close those guys were. If you're a Michigan fan, you might call it Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, Luke on your father, etc. That's kind of how it breaks down. But so when they get to January '69, Bump Elliott was a good coach, a very good coach. He's a very nice guy. He was pretty easy in the guys in a lot of ways. Bo was none of those things. So Bo felt we got a ton of talent on this team, and we're not tough enough, which sounds very similar to the transition you guys just went through from Hoke to Harbaugh. The same players, of course, went from 5 wins to 10 wins under Harbaugh. They got tough fast. 4-hour practices, all this stuff. That's exactly what Bo basically brought to Ann Arbor. His first meeting, they had no football building. They met in the garage door of the baseball stadium underneath the stands. It was cold. It's January. Bo gets them all together there. They got long hair. They got mustaches, Fu Manchus, goatees, and all this stuff. And Bo says he had a few things to say about all this. He says, "Gentlemen, I understand we've got a lot of problems with this team. The black guys, the white guys. We'll have none of that on this team. From now on, I'll treat you all the same, like dogs." Got their attention. And the white guys are thinking, "Wow, this guy's crazy." And the black guys are thinking, "Wow, this is our chance." we're all dogs. Is that right? We're all dogs equally. Look at the roster, by the way. The number of African-American players on the team greatly increased over the first 3 to 5 years that Bo coached. That was not an accident. Doors were open. That's the whole point. Whoever's best gets the job, period. The second thing Bo addressed was the hair, the mustaches, and all the rest. And where's Marty? I got to tell the Jim Betts story. There's no way I can't. So you know this story, Jack. You must. So Jim Betts, a good friend of mine, good friend of Bruce's also. See him on TV occasionally in the Big Ten Network. He's a 19-year-old kid from Cleveland who turned down Ohio State to play at Michigan. He's got a mustache coming in finally at age 19. And, man, there's no way in hell he's letting this mustache go. So Bo starts giving a speech, or from now on, the goatees, the lamb chops, all this crap is going. If you don't shave it off, I will. And he shows a rusty old blade, by the way. You don't want that. So Betts hears this and thinks, man, what can I do to save my mustache? The next day, he's got the guts. This takes a lot of guts. To walk into Bo's office and say, "Bo, you can't tell the black players on this team to shave off our mustaches." Because why the hell not? Because it's part of our heritage as black men to maintain facial hair. And Bo says, "I've never heard such crap in all my life. What the hell are you talking about?" And Betts says, "I'm telling you, Bo, you'll have a riot in the team. You don't want this. The guys are going to boycott. You can't do this." And Bo says, "Get the hell out of my office." And Betts walks out, not even sure if he's still on the team at this point. Later on that day at practice, Bo gathers the guys together and says, "It has come to my attention as part of our black man's heritage to maintain facial hair. So as of this day, you black guys can keep your mustaches." And now all Betts' African-American friends will give him, thinking, "What the hell did you say to him?" And Betts just looked down and says, "Do not crack a grin. Just look down." And Bo says, "As for you white guys, you have no heritage. Shave that shit off." 1969, man. The Black Action Movement made national news by taking over the president's office for a week. At that time, that's why they built the new one by the Cube. Of course, we call that the Paranoid Building. The building is built so you can't take it over. That's why it starts out like this and cuts out, and that's why the windows are funny and all the rest. It's a tunnel underneath that building leading across State Street, all right, to Angel Hall and everything else. It's all because of the Black Action Movement in the late '69. So that's the environment Bo was in. That's what Betts pulled off amazingly. And Betts ended up being a great academic advisor for Bo's early teens later on, and they were very close. And Bo, every 5 years, would say, "Betts, come on, man, tell me the truth. That was a bunch of bull crap, wasn't it? About the mustache." Said, "No, coach, I was being sincere. It's true." 5 years later, "Come on, Betts, tell me the truth. That's a bunch of bull, wasn't it?" "No, coach, it's a real deal. I swear to God." 30 years later, 1999, Bo said, "Come on, Betts, tell me the truth. That's a bunch of bull, wasn't it?" And Betts, all he does is inhale and goes, "Coach, I knew it, you son of a bitch." It was a joke. Of course, he got away with it. But otherwise, it was Woody Hayes football brought to Ann Arbor. Everything Bo knew about football pretty much came from Woody Hayes. They were almost identical teams by the time they finally met that season. They had lost one of the early games to Missouri, 40-17, here at the Big House. Bo's worst loss in 21 years. They had 2 block punts. What are you practicing on Monday? A whole lot of block punts. They lose to Michigan State up at East Lansing. You are now 3-2. That's not very good by any standard. But they start knocking teams off. They're unranked. They start blowing teams out. Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa. And finally, the Iowa game, I think, was 56-0. And at Iowa Stadium, kind of like what it was 2 weeks ago, but a blowout. The guys start taking their helmets and start screaming, "Beat the Bucks! Beat the Bucks! Beat the Bucks!" And the reason they're saying that, and you guys know this, though, you must. That spring, those practices were so tough. Harbaugh lost, what, 5 or 10 players? That's nothing. All right, what did he lose? 40, 50, 60? I've heard all kinds of estimates. Guys were leaving in the middle of the night to avoid seeing Bo. They leave their cars on campus to avoid confronting Bo with the fact that they were leaving. All right, that's when Bo had the brilliant idea to spend $100 of Don Campbell's money and a small little sign, not much bigger than this. And all it said was, "Those who stay will be champions." In other words, yeah, I know I'm being a bastard. I know I'm being tough on you guys. I'm not going to let up. But if you stick it out, you got the guts to stick it out, you'll be champions. That is saying a hell of a lot. That's a hell of a promise. Ohio State was undefeated the year before. They beat O.J. Simpson in the Rose Bowl. They're on fire in '69. Sports Illustrated said the only game worth watching college football right now is Ohio State's offense versus their defense in full hit practice on Tuesday in Columbus. No one is close. They're talking about the Vikings, Minnesota Vikings, then at the time the best NFL team, playing the Buckeyes after the season. That's how good the Buckeyes were. And you are promising me, if I put up with this, we are going to be Big Ten champions. That's hanging out there pretty good. That's all before the eve of that great game, of course. And that morning, Bo told me that one of Ohio State's starters missed the bus to the game. And who was it? The great Jim Otis. I did not realize that. All-American, big star in the NFL also. And Bo said they heard about that, and that told them that Ohio State was not geared up for that game the way Michigan was. They beat them 50-14 the year before. The famous line, Woody Hayes goes for 2 points into that game. Why does he go for 2 points? You guys must know that one. Why did he go for 2 points?
He couldn't go for 3.
So I can't go for 3. Exactly right. He's going to rub their noses in it. So there's no way Ohio State thought there's any chance that Michigan's going to beat them. But Michigan was actually believing it by that time. Jim Manish told me, the great tight end, the captain of that team from Ohio, he said, "I was crying in the tunnel of that game." I said, "Well, it's the greatest upset in Michigan history. Of course you were." No. We were crying in the tunnel before we took the field. Before, when the banner's up there and the announcer says, "Here come the Wolverines," he was crying in the tunnel before he took the field. That's how absolutely jacked up they were. And Iowa week before, Gary Mueller, the great coach, of course, told Bo, "These guys are getting too high. You got to bring them down." Bo said, no. We need every ounce of energy to pull off this upset. Let him go. All right? Let him go. So the Michigan was at a fever pitch for that game going into it. I'll turn it over to Jack. Jack, tell us how that game went.
That's the one game I can't remember. I remember all the scores except that one, John.
We can help you, Jack.
No, but I mean, to set the stage, from the Ohio State standpoint for that, Ohio State won that national title in 1968 with a team dominated by sophomores. So they were known as the super sophomores. On offense and defense, as many as 16 sophomores started. And to this day, there's 10 or probably 6 or 8 of them. They're still some of the greatest players in Ohio State football history. The Jim Stillwagons, the Jack Tatums, the John Brockingtons, the Rex Kerrs at quarterback. And you go down the line, and who's better than the next one there? And 1969, now that 68 team had some really good juniors, including Jim Otis, so the All-American fullback, but some really great senior leadership too. In fact, the 2 senior tackles on that team, the 2 offensive tackles were Dave Foley and Rufus Mays, and they were both seniors, and they were both All-Americans. So they were running behind a pretty good line. But that team was mostly back to the sophomores for the junior season of 1969. There's no question in my mind that the 1969 team was far better than the 1968 team that won an undefeated national championship. Nobody came within 27 points of Ohio State until they came to Ann Arbor. To say that another way, their smallest margin of victory was 27 points against the University of Minnesota. Ohio State had not been behind all season. You go through a whole season and you score first in every game. And some of the games were blowouts, 72-0 over TCU, which was a pretty good football team to start the season and so forth like that. It definitely was something I think that Ohio State was up for, but I don't think they were quite prepared mentally for what was going to happen. I don't think anybody was. I don't think even the most loyal of Michigan fans could have predicted what would happen that afternoon. In my way of thinking, it's probably the most significant Big Ten football game that's ever been played. Nobody would have guessed that Michigan could stay with Ohio State that day. They were 17 points favorites. In fact, I think ABC thought, why are we going to cover that game? The Nebraska-Oklahoma game will be much closer, and we should probably cover that one instead. It was no fluke. The final score was 24-12, and the scoring all took place in the first half. The Ohio State Buckeyes had the entire halftime and the entire second half to get their act together, and boy, didn't they try. But there was no scoring in the second half, but basically Michigan still dominated the second half. And there's one play in that game. Sometimes when you go back over, there's a lot of different plays, but the one that to me that always really said, I know we're in trouble. And this was right before the half. Kid, he wore jersey number 29. His name was Barry Pearson. He was from some small town up in the Upper Peninsula. And he returned a punt about 60 yards, I think it was, down inside. Don Moorhead, the quarterback there, number 27, managed a great game that day. And no question about it, the pupil beat the general, so to speak. That was what he did that day. Now, I'm going to put a little plug in for John here. John doesn't know I'm going to do this. But John wrote this book with Bo Schembechler. I teach a course across the country called The Leadership Secrets of Football's Master Coaches. And it's basically a leadership course for organizations and corporations of how to develop leadership within the organizations. I've delivered that program to organizations in 47 different states across the country. John autographed this book for me here. If you can maybe see this when we met one time in Columbus. This is one of the best books on leadership that's ever been written. I highly recommend it. If you haven't gotten it yet, I know this book almost word for word. And a lot of the strategies and a lot of the philosophies that I teach, and this is coming from an Ohio State guy now, that I teach in this leadership course are what Bo Schembechler did here at the University of Michigan. And by the way, I've become very, very good friends with his son, Shemmy. We were together, the three of us were together in Columbus about a year ago. Who would ever have guessed that Shemmy Schembechler, Bo's son, today would live 5 miles from Ohio Stadium? So anyway, it's a great, great book. And what Bo did here is one of the great examples of leadership any place in the country, football, government, anything else that I've ever seen. And I'm thankful that it happened. I just wish it had been the other way around.
So from that 1969 Michigan victory, the 10-year war is born out of that. Can you each describe the crucial moments of that 10-year war from each side's perspective?
By the way, I love Jack so much. I'm taking notes like crazy, Jack, on your stuff. So it's great. And a lot of people did not know, which is it's my job to know this stuff, and he knows more than I do. So a few things happened. One, the game itself, that game, interesting to hear Jack say it's the most significant game in Big Ten history. You make a case for that.
I think it is. I really do.
It is without question the biggest victory in the history of the University of Michigan. We're saying a lot. There are 935 victories. That is by far the most important, because that's the next, what you're living at now, Harbaugh included, Harbaugh coming back. All that is born in November of '69. Without that, you don't get this. And as Jack said, back then, Michigan averaged 60,000 fans per game. If you're averaging 60,000 fans per game, it means the average game, you got 40, 50, whatever, 1,000 empty seats. The guys I talked to, Dan Deerdorf, Dick Calderazzo, the guys on those teams, they could hear the wine bottles clinking down the cement steps during games. That's how drunk the students were. That's how little they cared. That's how many empty seats you had. So many that even for this game, despite all the hype, only about 100 guys believe Michigan was going to win that game, and they're all in Michigan's locker room. The fans did not believe that. My dad was in the stands that game, big fan. He said he just kept on waiting for Ohio State to wake up and crush Michigan like they did the year before. It's never happened. But Canham himself, Don Canham, the legendary AD, did not think Michigan was going to sell out even that game against #1 ranked Ohio State. So he went down to Toledo and dumped around 20,000 tickets to Ohio State fans. So if you look at that game on the YouTube clips, you're going to see a lot of red throughout that stadium. And the reason is Canham sold those guys the tickets. Bo, even after the greatest victory of his career, quick one on that, Bo and Woody were doing a banquet later on in their lives. And Woody said, I'm always asked, what was my greatest team? This backs up what Jack was saying. He said, without question, my 1969 team, this guy who won 5 national titles. He picked this team that did not win the national title. He said, we had great Rex Kearns, we had a great defense, we had great special teams, we had great leadership. And then he interrupts himself and looks down the dais and says, "Damn it, Bo, you will never win a bigger game." And Bo never did. That's as big as it gets. Nonetheless, Bo, even after that, was still so upset of seeing so much red in the stadium, he marches into Canham's office on Monday. This takes some guts also. And says, "Damn it, Canham, don't you ever sell my tickets again to Ohio State fans." And Canham very coolly smiles, motions the Bo to sit down, gives him a cigar, grabs one himself, puts his feet up on his desk and says, "Bo, after Saturday, I will never have to do that again." In other words, it is on from now on. The sellout started after that. And after that, man, that 10-year war was all that. Every game was tight. Every game was close. The first 4 games I saw were 72, 3, 4, and 5. Boom. Jack knows where I'm going with this one. 3 losses and 1 tie, and the tie was the bitterest of them all. Michigan did not lose to anybody else all 4 seasons. So I grew up thinking the first 10 games are warm-up. They will not lose to Purdue, Michigan State, anybody else. They never did, right? And they can't beat Ohio State. And the 10-10 tie, of course, go look up, and Jack's on this a lot, a great Big Ten Network production called Tiebreaker. They did a great job with this. After that game, they went to a vote of the ADs. Michigan's 10-0-1. Ohio State is 10-0-1. What do? They had no tiebreaker in place, no overtime back then, no sudden death. They had no idea how to break this thing. It's kind of silly in hindsight. So they did, Saturday night, a vote of the Big Ten ADs. At this point, Dennis Franklin, Michigan's quarterback, has, get this, a broken collarbone. Are we getting warm?
Yes.
So that word gets out. So 6 of the ADs vote for Ohio State and 4 for Michigan. Bo finds out Sunday morning driving in to Channel 7 in Detroit to do his show. He gets him on YouTube also. He just starts blasting everybody. He spares nothing. He did not care about PR. It was a pretty bad day for Michigan. The hilarious thing to me was Bo never forgot the 6 ADs who voted against Michigan. He knew their addresses, their names, the day he died. I was talking to Bo, and he's 76 years old in 2005. And he's getting tired sometimes in the afternoon. He's got a few medical conditions. He's got diabetes and some other stuff. So I had 2 options. I could either say, "Bo, let's get you some coffee and a sandwich from Mr. Spots," his favorite place, by the way. Tuna melt was his favorite. Or all I had to say was, "Hey, whatever happened in 73 with that vote they took? 2 fists on the table, launch himself out, those no-account sons of bitches." And he was alert and on fire for 2-3 more hours easily. He never forgot those guys. One of the great scenes, before he played Illinois, he respected Ohio State. He loved George Purvis at Michigan State. He respected Notre Dame. He hated Illinois for 3 reasons. One, they fired Gary Moore after 3 years in a 5-year contract. That's Bo's guy. They hired a coach, Mike White, who got caught for cheating. Bo knew he was cheating. And the third thing was they voted against Michigan in 1973. Fast forward like 15 years. It's 1988. And Bo would give his team a pep talk before Illinois. And don't forget, these no-account sons of bitches voted against us. The guys he's talking to were 5 years old when that happened. And they look at you and go, "What the hell is he talking about?" I don't know, but he's really pissed. So let's go beat him. So Bo used to say, certain teams, 100 points is not enough, and Illinois is 5 of them. And that was because of that vote.
Yeah, John, I remember Gary Moeller. Interesting, the last time Ohio State shut out Michigan was 1962. And Gary Moeller was one of the 2 Ohio State captains that year. And of course, he went on and he followed Bo and was one of Bo's assistants at Miami and up here, and then got the head coaching job at Illinois. I'll never forget when I got home one night from work and it was on the news that Illinois had fired Gary Moeller after 3 years, and they'd given him a 5-year contract. And they had put to Bo how upset Bo was. The program was so far down. You gave this guy 5 years, and now you cut him loose at 3. And they just told about how long that was. And I said to myself, I wonder how big the Michigan-Illinois score will be next year, this following fall. And that game, Bo ran up 70 points on Michigan. And I wasn't a bit surprised. I wasn't a bit surprised at what happened there when you
I
did
got to
that.
follow up on that one quickly.
So Bo hates Illinois with every fiber in his being. Illinois comes into Michigan Stadium, and they're ahead 21-7 in the first half. The entire first 5 or 6 games, Bruce some staff at that point. 5 or 6 games, no one has scored 21 total points against Michigan at this point. They rattled off 21 points. I have no idea what goes in the locker room at the half, but I'm willing to bet it was loud, one-sided, and highly effective. Michigan goes out and scores 9 unanswered touchdowns the second half against Illinois. The second half score was 63-0. That's a good month for most teams. You know, that was 2 quarters of play. Get the starters out there to the very end, very rare for Bo. And as Bo said, that is one game I did not call the dogs off. And like I said, that's the great line where it's not enough. Illinois is 5 of them. He meant it. He hated Illinois the day he died.
Well, you know, when you play 69 and it's all over, then you look ahead to the next year. Woody Hayes, when he got back to Columbus from that game right here in Ann Arbor, it was the 22nd of November of 1969. Woody Hayes went right to his office that night and started working on the 1970 game. Now, I encourage everybody to be prepared for something. That might be a little bit the extreme, but he actually did. He went there right to his office that night. I don't think there's ever been a football game at Ohio State, a home game at Ohio State, that had the build-up of the 1970 Ohio State-Michigan game. Not this one coming up this Saturday, not the 2006 game, not the 2002 game, which is one of, that helped Ohio State win another national championship under Jim Tressel. But the build-up to that 1970 game was just something, and I think it proved so many things. First of all, Ohio State said, I don't know how this happened to us, it won't happen again, because these super sophomores now are going to be seniors in 1970. The second thing was, the game was moved to the last game of the regular season by both schools in 1935. Now, by 1970, that's 35 years later, all those games over that 35 years, there had never been a game yet where both teams were undefeated and untied going into the game. And both of them were undefeated and untied going into that 70 game. It proved that Ohio State had still one of the great eras in its history. What else did it prove? It proved that Bo Schembechler was no fluke at all. His 1970 team was one of the great coaching jobs. He had I think a middle guard, I think he was a walk-on, by the name of Henry Hill, I believe. And I can see that kid playing his heart out in that game in 1970. Ohio State would win that game 20-9. Henry Hill comes off the field. And I can see Bo yet putting his arm around him, and it's almost like you could read what he said to him. I know you were a walk-on. I think he became an All-American, did he?
All-American captain.
Captain there, and here's a walk-on to do that. Here's a kid finishing up his career. You could just see so much emotion in that. But Ohio State, the build-up to that game, that stadium was filled an hour before the game. If you go to a cookout somewhere in the summer in Columbus, Ohio, leading up to that game, the whole talk during the cookout was, how many more weeks till Michigan comes to town? 24 weeks. You got tickets? Anybody got tickets, to do that? And Ohio State won the game. Woody Hayes always told his players, you're either getting better or you're getting worse. And I think that's a great lesson for any of us in life. You go into the business world, don't coast. If you get a lot of success, don't coast. Vince Lombardi was really great at that. Lombardi always said you can't coast by staying on the same level. You'll be going downhill. And so basically that 1970 game was a redemption game for Ohio State. It wasn't going to be pretty, and it was ended up, as we said, 20-9. And that was a huge step in creating the second chapter of the 10-year war.
On that one, Dan Dierdorf, go check out the HBO rivalry video if you haven't already. They did a phenomenal job as 10 years ago. Jack's on there quite a bit, as he should be. And Dan Dierdorf's got a good sense of humor. They had the bus trip, and I've taken this bus trip, Jack, from the Michigan Hotel to the stadium. If you ever get a chance to be on that bus, Bruce, I know you've been on that bus. I've been on that bus with you. It is unlike any other ride you'll ever take the rest of your life. They know the route that the bus is going to take to get to that stadium. It's about a mile and a half, I think. It is a very slow process, even with the police escort. You will see everything on the way to that stadium. I think it starts for real in 1970. Dierdorf said the whole way there, we saw everything. The fingers, the moons, the banners that were not G-rated, welcoming Michigan to Columbus, I believe, more or less. And as Dan said, chuckling, they were ready for us.
That's exactly what he said.
Exactly, and the game takes off from there. By the way, on the book, you get better, you get worse. You've heard Jim Harbaugh say this all season long. Where did he get it? Bo Schembechler. Where did he get it? Woody Hayes. Right? So many of Bo's phrases. Jim's come from Bo, and Bo comes from Woody. Archie Griffin, the two-time Heisman Trophy winner, still the only one. And turns out a great guy. He's the often legendary Buckeye. You know him very well. I've gotten to know him fairly well. I know you know him very well. One of my out-there favorites. I told him about 5 years ago when I started interviewing him. He ruined my childhood. 4 games, the guy was undefeated against Michigan. he was always the MVP. And then you meet him as an adult, he's a great guy, so I can't even hate him. So now you're screwing up my adulthood. So, but he said on the Big Ten Network about that book, if you made it starting grade, it would have been Woody's Lessons. That's how close these teams were. Bo said if you changed the uniforms on game day, you couldn't tell which team was which. So running the same plays the same way, they don't jump off sides, either team, the same basic systems. For all the hatred they had for each other in the 70s, these two teams, when these guys get together, it is a blast. It is a riot because no one else, Purdue, Indiana, Illinois, have no idea what it's like to be coached by Bo Schembechler or Woody Hayes. The other guy knows exactly what it's like. And Bo said, you take one of those blue snap lines from carpentry, you've all seen those, the snap the chop. He said, man, you can take one of those lines on the offensive line of Ohio State or the defensive line of Michigan, or flip them over. Snap the line, there'd be a blue stripe on every single helmet because that's how precise those teams were. It was not creative football. They threw the ball maybe 15 times in a game, max. It was blood and guts, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, but man, it was technically perfect football. And Bo also said, I never ever had to worry about my team getting up for that game. If I got to get you up for an Ohio State game, you come to the wrong school. Right? That's what we live for around here. We live for Ohio State also. And Bo said also, 10 games out of the year, my job is to get you jacked up to play Purdue or Iowa or Indiana. The 11th game, my job is to get you calmed down enough to focus on the job you had before you, because those guys can't think of their own names. They're so jacked up by game time. So that's what that game means to those guys.
So moving forward, from after Woody Hayes moves on from being Ohio State coach, we talk about what comes after the 10 Years' War and into the 1980s.
And just one thing, if I may, too, I think, John, too, the other thing is when those guys do get together, so many of those players that played for Michigan in that 10-year war were from Ohio. And they played against each other in high school. I mean, Rob Riddle, Tom Darden, Billy Taylor, Dan Dierdorf. I mean, it goes down. And so many of those guys have played in all-star games, but they actually played against each other in high school. So their relationship went way, way back. When Woody Hayes' career came to an end, and a lot of you know the story, he hit a player at the end of the game, towards the end of the game against Clemson in the Gator Bowl, and his career was over. Woody was 65 and probably was time to retire anyway, and his career came to a very, very sudden end. It was actually on a Friday night, and we're playing in the Gator Bowl. It wasn't even a New Year's Day game. It was the 29th of December of 1978. And a quick little story, Bo and the Michigan team were out at the Rose Bowl. And, of course, the news spread very rapidly that Woody Hayes is now relinquished his job as head coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes. And, boy, Bo felt bad. And after the game was over, that New Year's Day that year fell on, I think it was a Monday. And so when the team got back, I'm going to guess on Tuesday, he immediately called Woody Hayes, Bo did, and said, hey, I want to come down and see you. I want to come down and see you. Let's talk and everything like that. Woody says, no, you don't do that. You've got recruiting to do. You take care of yourself. I'm fine. We'll get together sometime later, maybe after spring practice. And Bo insisted, no, I'm coming down to Columbus. I want to see you, Woody. And Woody finally said, okay, let's compromise. And one of the guys that they had known and had worked with for many, many years, he was one of Woody Hayes' first assistants when Woody took the job in 1951, was a man by the name of Dwight Perry. And Dwight Perry, after coaching Ohio State for 4 years as an assistant, Ohio State would win the national title in 1954 undefeated, and Dwight Perry would be the backfield coach, and he would get the Bowling Green job. He'd do real well there, and he spent most of his career as athletic director. When he became head coach at Bowling Green in 1955, I think it was the first, if it wasn't the first, one of the first assistants he hired was Bo Schembechler. So that's how these relationships build and build and build. So anyway, let's go to 78. Woody says, let's compromise. We'll just meet at Deutz. Now, you know, Bowling Green is about halfway between Ann Arbor and Columbus. So the following Sunday, Mrs. Perry cooked. Bo Schembechler drove down to Bowling Green from Ann Arbor. Woody Hayes drove up to Bowling Green from Columbus. And Mr. and Mrs. Dwight Perry, Woody Hayes, and Bo Schembechler, with the two of them meeting face-to-face for the first time, had Sunday dinner at Dwight Perry's. Wouldn't you love to have been a little mouse on the wall there or something like that? But that shows, again, the great relationships that were developed all of those years. Now, after Woody Hayes, a man by the name of Earl Bruce was in it. Not too many people had heard of. Earl had actually coached under Woody Hayes. He played at Ohio State. His career had it was very short because of an injury. But he coached in Ohio 13 years. He's been 3 times the Ohio High School Coach of the Year. 2 of those at Massillon High School, which is quite a high school, of course, for football teams. And he was a little bit of an unknown coming in. A lot of the Ohio State fans wanted Lou Holtz. And Holtz had also been an Ohio State assistant under Woody Hayes in 1968. But Earl would come in and have immediate success. He'd have a 9, and he'd actually have an 11 year and almost come within 1 point of winning a national title in his first year. And then after that, he had really, really good seasons, but lost 3 games every year except his last game. He did well against Michigan. His record against Michigan was 5-4. That's pretty good. And his bowl record was 5-3. So Earl took over, and we had some great players during that period of time. Particularly guys like Chris Spielman would be very, probably maybe one of the best examples.
Just going into those years, once Woody has moved on and Bo is still at Michigan, what are some of the crucial moments in this rivalry?
I'll get to that in a second, Andrew. I got to follow up on 2 things: the Woody Bo thing as well as the Earl Bruce tenure. Woody and Bo, like I said, they were father-son at first when he was his mentor during that time. For 10 years, they were arch enemies. They talked twice a year for 10 years. All right, once in Chicago at the Big Ten meeting in July, where he would say, Bo, Woody, that's it. They'll walk past each other. And then at the midfield before the Michigan Ohio State game, they'd chat for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and that's it. So you went from best friends, from father-son basically, to no communication whatsoever for 10 years, except for 2 crucial bookend situations. Bo has a heart attack the night before his first Rose Bowl, December 31st of '69. The first visitor at his home on Arlington, right down here in Ann Arbor, his first visitor is a guy named Wayne Woodrow Hayes. Went out of his way, he's not recruiting Michigan. Right, went out of his way to be the first guy at Bo's house to see how Bo's doing in a robe, getting bed rest, recovering from his heart attack. And he sent Bo a beautiful note, which I've got, actually, thanks to Bo's papers and all that. And he said, they were not the same without you. You played a phenomenal game against us. I hope you don't play any more handball. You're not very good at it. Just play handball all the time. That was the first one. Then you go fast forward to the last Woody Bo game, the one Jack's talking about. He punched the player. His job is in the mix, so they decided to be at Doig Perry's house in Bowling Green. You're driving down US 23 on your right, you're going to see Bowling Green Stadium. It is called Doig Perry Stadium. That's what Doig Perry was. And Bo is there begging Woody Hayes to apologize for what he did in the hopes of saving Woody's job. Think about that. You don't lose to anybody else, essentially, for 10 straight years. The only guy you ever lose to is Woody Hayes. And you're begging him to keep his job. That's how complicated that relationship is. That's how much they both loved the rivalry and how much it meant to them. And Woody Hayes, of course, did not apologize. He did lose his job, and it broke Bo's heart. He cried when he got the news. He says, Bo did not cry a hell of a lot. We can say that, and Bruce knows where I'm going with this one. In Bo's office, the day that he died, Bruce and I were there many times. He only had 3 or 4 things framed. And one of them was a photograph of Bo with a short shirt and a tie. Woody Hayes, same thing, at Doig Perry's house for that Sunday dinner with Mrs. Perry cooking, when Bo's trying to convince him to save his job. And I never saw Bo wear any rings. There are no trophies in his office. That's not what he cared about. But that was on his wall the day he died. That says a hell of a lot about what these guys thought about each other. And I said, was the press there? He goes, no. I said, no, university officials? He goes, no. I go, why are you guys wearing ties? And it's the photo. It says, never occurred to me not to. Show respect. All right? On a Sunday, on your off day, and you're supposed to be recruiting, you drive down to save a man's job, and you wear a tie because that's your mentor. All right? That's what it meant to Bo. And whenever I wanted to get Bo sentimental, we want to get him mad, talk about the vote in '73. You want to get him sentimental? Just ask him for a Woody Hayes story. He had hundreds of these things. One of his favorites was when he was coaching for Woody. Woody was famous for taking his hat off and tearing the bill, right? Taking his nice gold watch and throwing it down and stomping at it till it broke, all this crazy stuff. At one point, Bo had to go in his office to find another whistle. And while going through his drawers, he found a handful of hats that were pre-torn at the bill, right? They're already clipped, so when he grabbed them, he could tear them very easily, all right? And he found in the next drawer about 20 or 30 cheap gold watches, all right? This is all an act all these years, and a phenomenal act. Woody Hayes was an amazing actor. And then in the other drawer under his desk, he found about 50 or 100 uncashed checks, speeches that Woody Hayes had given around town, and he refused to cash them. Right, that's the kind of man Woody Hayes was. They were not making much money at that point, like $21,000, not money at all. He refused to cash them. And that's what Bo told me about Woody. And as he's telling me this, he's getting kind of choked up. And I said, you loved him, didn't you? Of course I loved him. I said, great man. And me being from Ann Arbor, I said, did you ever tell him that you loved him? And Bo said, did I ever tell Woody, are you, what? You don't tell a man like that you love him. Holy crap, you must be a liberal. You're from Ann Arbor. That's your problem right there. They never, ever said that. They never would. But the night before Woody Hayes died, he introduced Bo to speech using a cane to get to the podium and went on for 20, 30 minutes about what a great coach and friend Bo was. And he knew his clock was ticking. I asked Bo in September of 2005, if you had one more week at the height of your powers, what would you ask for? And he said, well, I don't want any more banquets. I don't need those. I don't need any more TV time. I want my wife in town, my kids around me, and one more week in preparation for the Buckeyes of Ohio State. That would be wonderful. And he goes with great love and care about what that would look like. And make it against the great Wayne Woodrow Hayes. And he said, if I gave my speech the night before, and my team was ready, and I mean mission ready, I'd go back to my hotel room, sit in the corner of the bed, just say, and I'd be satisfied. So what happens the next day is not to me, it's to the players. If they come through, they get the credit, not me. All you can do as a parent, a teacher, a coach, is get your people ready for their moment. If they come through, give them the credit. So that's all I need. To fast forward 14 months, that was Bo's last week, incredibly. His doctor, Kim Eagle, one of the great cardiologists, told him that he was not down to months, maybe even weeks, maybe even days. And any of us would have gone into the hospital trying to stretch it out. Bo went full blast, went to practice outside the cold. He gave the speech on Thursday night to the team. All right, they were mission ready at that point. This is number one. This is number two. Undefeated, 2006, big deal. The next morning at Channel 7 with Don Shane, he's in the actual locker room of Channel 7. I've been there, you've been there. It's an actual locker room. And Bo's defibrillator fires around 35 times, I understand. Any one of us gets knocked over backwards from that. Bo sits there, he takes it, he stands up to do his job, and his heart gives out, and that's it. And it was not a heart attack. A heart attack, you do the right thing at the right time, you can save the guy. It's heart failure. He already had 2 heart attacks, quadruple bypass surgery, pacemaker, you name it. I don't think they do what they did, all right? And I get the news, and we're all crying at that point. I instinctively went down to see Bruce and everyone else at Bo's office. And while I'm there, I'm thinking, I've heard this before. I went back that afternoon to go through all my 300 pages of notes from a year and a half of interviews with Bo. And September 14, 2005, he told me exactly what his last was going to be. I said, son of a bitch. I know a lot of guys that lived the life that they dreamed. I know one guy who scripted his own passing and then executed that to perfection. That's what a tough SOB Bo was. That's how important the Michigan Ohio State game was to Bo. He's not about to die before playing Indiana. All right, that was Bo, man. And on the Earl Bruce front, Bo had great respect for Earl Bruce. I thought he got a raw deal before the Michigan Ohio State game in 1988, was it? 87, that's right, it's up here. 87, they announced that Earl Bruce had been fired before the game. All right, he's already got a winning record against Michigan at that point. The Ohio State band comes to his house. There's a night to serenade him with all the great Ohio State songs. Before the game, all the players at Ohio State take their helmets off, and they got headbands around their heads. And they do not allow that at Ohio State or at Michigan. And Earl Bruce can't believe it. You know, what are you guys doing? Then he gets closer, and they all say Earl on their headbands. And they were not better than Michigan that year, I don't think. They found some way to win that year out of nothing, and they won the game. After that game, Bo Schembechler, who hated losing, as has been documented, and really hated losing to Ohio State. After that game, he walks into the Ohio State locker room. Right? And that alone, they're going nuts in there. They see Bo coming, and wave by wave, they all turn quiet, because what the hell is this? Right? Bo did not go into the Ohio State locker room ever after a loss, certainly, let alone a win. And he's there, as I understand it, he says, I hate losing, and I really hate losing to you guys. This is one day I can accept it. And he walks out. Right? That's the respect Bo had for Earl Bruce.
So, yeah, and I think if you go back over the years, and the games are never played on paper, but if you do play them on paper, a lot of times the team that's supposed to win does not win this game. In the 1987 was one of the best examples of that. Michigan definitely had a better team that year. That was probably Earl Bruce's weakest team. You'll have one over it. That was his 9th year as head coach. And Ohio State was down in that game 13-0 and came back, and Michigan went ahead 20-14. And we had a place kicker that year by the name of Matt France that had kicked 53 consecutive extra points. Ohio State scores and makes it 20-20. We're in the 4th quarter, and he has to kick that extra point, and hey, we'll be ahead. He misses the extra point. That's the most important extra point he'd ever had. Well, the Ohio State team said, we'll get the ball back for you, and sure enough, they did. He got a chance at a medium, about a 35-yard field goal, and hit that, and that's how Ohio State won that game 23-20. The game meant nothing in the Big Ten standings for Ohio State. Ohio State finished that year 6-4-1. But if you're an Ohio State fan, as I am, that's one of my favorite wins over Michigan because of what it did, because of what it meant to Earl Bruce to really to be able to do that. So it's really, really a big win.
So we're running a little bit low on time, so I'm going to let John first talk about 1990s and some of the Michigan success there, and then I'm going to let Jack talk about 2000s and Ohio State's dominance.
The 90s for Michigan were a phenomenally good decade against Ohio State, and they shouldn't have been. Michigan was always the underdog. You had 3 coaches in that stretch, Bo in '89, of course, going against John Cooper at Ohio State. Then Moeller had 5 years. His last 3 years are 8, or last 3 years, 2 years. Last 2 years are 8-4. Boyd Carr's first 2 years are 8-4 before they take off. And almost always Michigan was heavily underdog. In '93, Ohio State's undefeated and lose 20-0, incredibly. '95, they're again #1 in the nation. And a guy named Tishimanga Yakabatuka, a name they could not pronounce before that game, and now most Buckeye fans can spell that, I think. He went wild, 300 yards. They win 31-23. '96, Ohio State's undefeated again. Michigan beats them. It's an incredible run. And Michigan really had no business winning those games, but that's what rivalry does. And of course, in the 2000s, I'll give it a check.
Sometimes, John Cooper is known a little bit to Ohio State fans as a guy that couldn't beat Michigan. That's kind of unfortunate, although it's very accurate. He was there 13 years. His record was 2-10-1. And he didn't have a very good record in bowl games. He was 3-8 in bowl games. So if you look at John's record over those 13 years and remove the bowl games and remove the Michigan games, he has about an 85% winning percentage.
Which is crazy.
It's crazy. I mean, he just beat everybody. He beat Penn State when those Penn State teams were so good. He beat Lou Holtz's 2 really great teams out of Notre Dame. He beat them back to one game he scored 45 points. That's the most points ever scored against Notre Dame, against a team coached by Lou Holtz. But he couldn't beat Michigan, and I think it became a mental. I think it possibly became a little bit of a mental thing there, a little bit at the end there, not being able to do that. So that's what really, actually there's a 10-game spread yet in the series with 58 for Michigan, 48 for Ohio State, and of course most of that 10 goes back to the first 15 games. 15 years ago, it was a 21-game spread. Actually, Michigan had 21 more victories than Ohio State had. And everything changed back the Ohio State way in 2001. When Ohio State hired a guy out of the Division II school up at Youngstown State University that a lot of Ohio State fans did not want. They wanted Glenn Mason if they couldn't get Lou Holtz. And not too many people had ever heard of Jim Tressel. And Jim Tressel, this is a good lesson, I think anybody in the business world, it's a little bit, not quite to the extent of Jim Beckler coming into Ohio State, but Jim Tressel hit the ground running. He's a very accomplished speaker. I'll never forget his acceptance speech. He'd only been appointed the coach. The acceptance speech on Wednesday, the 18th of January of 2001. And he was just told on Tuesday, the 17th, he was going to be the head coach. And I'm sure he had a lot more things to do than work up a speech. But he gave that speech from the heart. He talked about all of these experiences. He talked about his family growing up to next to the great Lou Groza, the place kicker for so many years for the Cleveland Browns, and how he would learn football from the Grozas and all things like that. Ironically, that night in Columbus, the University of Michigan was playing the Ohio State University in a basketball game. Now, how many times would that happen, huh? But Jim is announced as the new head coach. Of course, it's been announced in the 4 o'clock press conference and it's been announced the day before, but he's introduced to the crowd at the basketball game that night. And he didn't speak very long, but he made a statement that will forever be a part of Ohio State football history. And he said, "You will be proud of our young people in the classroom, in the community, and most especially in 310 days in Ann Arbor, Michigan." Now, he knew from the day he was hired, he had to beat Michigan. That's something Ohio State had only done twice in the past 13 years. And he set that as an objective, probably even more than Woody Hayes did. I don't know, but at least as much. And there was 310 days. And we weren't as good a team as Michigan in 2001. There's no way we were. But Ohio State, I remember seeing that game. We won the game 26-20. And Michigan made almost every mistake possible in that first half. They put a substitute quarterback in. They centered the ball over his head that went for a safety. You remember that? Everything went wrong. I think the Michigan team was a little bit overconfident.
No doubt.
Well, and to top it all off, one of the great quarterbacks who would lead us to a national title the next year was out of Detroit, Sterling Heights, was a kid by the name of Craig Krenzel. And he's a Michigan kid starting his very first game for Ohio State, a quarterback in that team. Michigan woke up, as you might say, in the second half and came back to life. And the final score was 26-20. Had it gone a third half, Michigan probably would have won that game. But that started a period of time there where Ohio State would win 9 out of 10 over Michigan. Now, there was a lot of luck in some of those games. I don't think there's any question about that. The 2005 game up there where we come back to win that game 25-21 by scoring 2 touchdowns real late in the game. And Michigan was definitely the better team in 2004. But, hey, Ohio State won that game 37-21 by making the big plays. They made a ton of big plays in that game. They were just ready to go. And Tressel knew how, basically, to really get the team up for the Michigan game. I don't know what this correlation is in the business world, because a lot of what we learn in football can help us with things in life far, far more important than football. But one of the criticisms of John Cooper was he got his teams up too high in the middle of the season. And in the middle of those seasons, Ohio State, in many of those years, particularly 94 through 98, Ohio State could have beaten anybody in the country. They really could have. But they peaked, and by the time the Michigan game came around, they weren't playing as good a football. Tressel's team started out much slower, and they really hit their peak at the end of the season there. And so it was a great run for Ohio State with Jim Tressel. He won 7 Big Ten titles for us in the 10 years. The 2002 game was, it doesn't sound, if you tell somebody the score is going to be 14-9, you may not think that's too exciting. It's one of the most exciting Michigan games of all time. The defenses were tremendous. Michigan got inside the Ohio State 20, which is a red zone, of course, 3 times. And the Ohio State defense held them to 3 field goals. Ohio State only got inside the Michigan 20-yard line 2 times, but they scored touchdowns on both of those. If you go back over from the Ohio State standpoint, one of the key plays ever in an Ohio State-Michigan game is an option play run by Craig Krenzel in that 2002 game. They'll give Ohio State the winning touchdown. A kid by the name of Maurice Hall is in a tailback. And it's the only time in the entire 2002 season that Ohio State will run the option play. They had that in their inventory for whenever they needed it, and they couldn't beat it at a later time. So that kind of started to even the series back up. And I think Ohio State, John and Andrew, were probably enjoying a lot of the after game celebrations that Michigan's fans had enjoyed for so many of those years 1 decade earlier.
Yeah, with just a few minutes left, we are going to go to the audience if anyone has any questions.
I need one to break the ice. Who's got it? Here we go, sir. Go do it.
Go ahead.
What are your projections for Saturday? Again.
Well, I do a radio feature on the pregame show, 97.1 The Fan. I've been doing it for 38 years now for the Ohio State Football Radio Network, and I'm surprised they asked me to predict the scores anymore, because if you're a betting man, which I am not, if you're a betting person, you want to listen to my prediction and then bet the other way, because I'm very, very far off. I predicted a 21-point Ohio State victory over Michigan State Saturday, so you know that it's not there. I'm predicting Ohio State will win this game Saturday by a score of 27-17. There's a lot of intangibles here that will obviously play into it. I think one thing, if you're an Ohio State fan, one thing you're concerned about is your offensive line going up against Michigan's defense. But to be very objective about it, as objective as somebody like I can be, I think we definitely have an edge at quarterback. And I definitely feel, at least at this time, that we still have an edge in coaching. And I think the coaching will make a difference in this game. And I think that's probably going to be the big difference. So I'm going to predict anywhere from a 20 to 27, 17 to 7. I'm predicting anywhere from a 7 to 10 Ohio State victory.
I hate predictions. I always get them wrong too, of course. But right now, I hate to tell you, Michigan fans, I have 17-14 Ohio State due to the offensive line as well as the questions at quarterback. Having said that, big plays, like Jack said, make all the difference in a game like this. Michigan has more big players, I believe, than Ohio State does. The real Peppers. If he breaks one loose, a la Woodson, a la Desmond Howard, of course, in these big games, that's a game changer right there. Amara Darboh is playing great. Cheston's underrated. Jake Butt is right there. If they can find a way to get those guys the ball, anything can change right there. Jack, I was following very nicely with you right at the very end. You mentioned the coaching advantage. Disagree.
I wouldn't have wanted you to agree with me.
Of course,
Todd.
of course.
I
I
just wanted to agree
just
at
said
all.
that, but I just want to draw. Urban Meyer is one of the craziest, best coaches I've encountered when I first met him in the spring of 2012 to do a previous book called 4th and Long. He was already telling me that they were practice before spring ball even started. In other words, he had the coaches out there and the staffers and interns, equipment managers with pylons and whistles and scoreboards and so on and clocks, moving things around. So do this drill, do this drill, do this drill. No players yet. That's insane. Okay, that is what a serious coach looks like. And I heard that, and I said, and they're 6 and 7 the year before Ohio State was. I said, man, I don't know what they're going to do, but they're going to be 6 and 7 this year. This guy is a flat-out coach. Clearly, Harbaugh as well. 4 straight turnarounds he's done at every level, obviously. So there's no way this is going to be a dogfight. I cannot see a thing where it's not going to be.
And I agree with John. That is one reason I preface that as of yet. I think we have a coaching edge on there, 16-5 and so forth like that. But there's no question under Jim Harbaugh, the program really improved. And it has improved immensely the second year. It's been a tremendous improvement. And I think that's what every Ohio State fan expected. The day it was announced that Jim Harbaugh was going to be the new coach of Ohio State, a lot of Ohio State fans are thinking, is this going to be a return to the Woody and Bo years? I think maybe the same thing was thought up here.
All right, well, that is going to wrap it up. Sorry we couldn't take any more questions. Hope you enjoyed today's panel. The recording will be live on YouTube, or was live on YouTube, and it'll be there too if you want to go back and watch it. And looking forward to this Saturday's game. Thank you all for coming. Have a great day.
Big hand for Andrew, by the way. He just, well done. How you guys?